Hi, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. Great to have you here. And again, a huge shout out to all of you as our Patreon supporters for your ongoing support. And we love being able to bring this extra content to you. If you've had a chance to, and how are you, Paul? Sorry, I haven't acknowledged your presence. How are you, Paul?
My presence needs no acknowledgement, but I'm going great. Thank you, David.
No, always good to have you here. So Paul and I, if you've managed to check out episode 42, spent some quality time with Jim Daneker from Nashville in the US. And this bonus episode is some extra content where we talk to Jim more in depth about his development of the Backstage Pass series of software plugins, samples that he's developed. And it's safe to say that I'm about to, when I finish this in the next few hours, log off and pull the trigger on that Backstage Pass software myself. I've been sold. So yeah, we hope you enjoy this. Jim does have some fascinating insights on just what is involved in doing this sort of work, and we hope you enjoy it. So, Jim, really keen to talk, as we discussed in the main episode, you've had a hell of a career in music, but you've turned what I'm assuming was initially a sideline into an amazing business as far as selling plugins or main stage sounds or, and I believe expanding beyond main stage. Just tell us about, firstly, what started you on that route to developing your own work in that area.
Okay. So the short version is that for years, I would have other keyboard players ask me, have you ever considered selling your sounds that you've created? Especially the stuff that I did with Michael W. Smith. You know, in the stuff that Michael does, the modern worship / Christian pop stuff, especially the live albums, there's a lot of pads and textures on that stuff. And it's just sounds that I've really enjoyed creating. I'm never one who's content with factory sounds. I always, if I find something I like, I feel like I can always make it better. I can make it bigger or wider or whatever. So I had a lot of guys ask if I would do that. And the answer was always no. I don't have the time, and I don't have the platform. And so there was always a reason not to. Well, in 2019, I think it was, I found out that Michael's tour calendar was empty for a couple months, and I've never been on salary. I just get paid by the show. And so, that's always a bit of a challenge at times. And that particular year, along that same time when I was trying to figure out how am I going to pay the bills for a couple months, I started reading that major artists were using Mainstage a lot and exclusively. In their touring systems. Toto and David Rosenthal with Billy Joel, they had these big elaborate main stage rigs. And I had always done everything in Logic. I've used Logic for 30 years. And I even use it live on tour with Smitty to run all our stems and click tracks and SMPTE for video and all that kind of thing. And I also used it for my sounds. The problem is when you start and stop Logic, it would cut your sounds off. And so I would use Kontakt running standalone alongside Logic. But when I saw that all these other artists were using Mainstage, I thought, maybe Mainstage has matured, and maybe that would be a way that I could finally put out some kind of sample pack or whatever. And at the same time, I saw that there were 2 or 3 companies who were doing just that. They were releasing content for Mainstage. So it felt like the time was right. And I did a little research that summer. And I started putting out some feelers on Facebook, some Facebook groups for Mainstage. And I thought, let me get a read on if this would even be worthwhile. And I think because of my tenure with Michael, that certainly helped. And so I decided I'm going to really give this a shot. So I spent about 3 months, summer of 2019, and I built this thing called Backstage Pass. And it's both a product and the umbrella name of everything that I do now. It's all called the Backstage Pass family of products. But Backstage Pass itself was the very first release. And it's basically a virtual keyboard rig for Mainstage that comprises, really it's the meat and potatoes stuff. It's a handful of really good acoustic pianos, electric pianos, a Hammond B3, and about 40 really good pads and soundscapes, and all wrapped in a really pretty GUI that gives you on-screen control of everything. But the thing that really set it apart from other products like that was that I designed an iPad interface for it using TouchOSC. And what that lets you do is it lets you craft your sounds in real time while you're playing. So for me, I use an iPad as part of my keyboard rig. And it's just a way to like, okay, well, what if I want to dial in just a little bit more reverb on this piano while I'm playing? I can do that. So it's just a unique way of addressing, you know, or how do I say it? It's a way of giving everybody else the keyboard rig that I've used for several years, and it works for me. And I thought, well, let me make it general enough that anybody can use. And so that was the beginning of it. It came out in September 2019. And the funny thing is, I thought, boy, this has to sell 30 copies or I can't pay my bills this month. And thankfully it sold 75 copies the first day. And
wow.
So I thought,
Brilliant.
all right, well, there's enough here to, this probably is worth pursuing. And it's still a side thing, or I'm trying to keep it a side thing, but it's really, it's a tough balancing act because it's an extraordinary amount of work to put out one release. And then you got to support it, and you got to build a website, and you got to do the e-commerce stuff, and you got to do demos and videos, and it's never ending. And so I put out the first expansion for it a few months later, which is just a digital, a dedicated piano. A friend of mine in Nashville has a Yamaha MIDI Grand, and he sampled it, and it's one of the best sampled pianos I've ever heard. And so we put that out. But my real passion was the 80s sounds, all that iconic stuff from the DX7. So I spent about a year developing one called DX Dreams, and I produced it. We were talking in the main interview about how a DX7 by itself really sounds pretty awful. Mm-hmm. But when you produce it the way that you did in the 80s with, you know, AMS reverb and Lexicon reverb and Roland Dimension D, and then you stack a bunch of them, that's where those sounds came from. And so I thought, you know, okay, Arturia's got a DX7 plugin. There's Dext, which is a really good DX7 plugin, but they're just giving you a virtual single DX7. That's still not that interesting to me. To me, what makes it work is stacking, you know, 8 of them or 12 of them, detuning them and panning them apart. That's what you did with a Yamaha TX816 rack. And so I found a TX816 and a DX5, and a lot of those sounds are 12 layers, you know, and they're just big and epic, which no single DX7 could ever do. So put that out, and that one's done really well. Everybody's after me to, when are you going to do a Kontakt version? Because it's all, you know, right now it's exclusive to Mainstage and Logic. Yep. So that's the next step, is getting it all into Kontakt.
And how hard is that, Jim, as far as getting a Kontakt version? I assume that's quite a process.
It's a bear. Yeah. Doing the actual initial conversion is easy. That's all done, actually. But I actually, for a long time, I said I would never do it because I'm a stickler for quality, and I'm never going to put something out unless it sounds exactly and plays exactly like the real thing. And so it definitely is obsessive, but that's the only way to do it, I think. And so because of the fact that every sampler sounds different, you know, Kontakt has its own filter models. They sound different than the filters that are in Logic and Mainstage. So I just decided early on, I'm not going to do it. If you want these sounds, you got to get Mainstage or Logic. However, a couple months back, I started doing some experiments to see, okay, well, how close can I get this? Because I'm cutting out a huge market by not having it in Kontakt. And so I got it far enough along to where I realized, okay, I can do this, but it's just a massive amount of work because you do the initial conversion, and then you have to go in and, you know, with DX7 sounds, there's a thing about the release on a DX7 sound. There's always a little weird behavior that happens where, you know, in a traditional synth, it's like the filter closes down a little bit. So you have to go in and program all that for every single patch. And it's a huge amount of work. So I'm slowly making progress in that. But the other factor is realizing it's not, the Kontakt version is not going to have the big elaborate GUI like Mainstage. There's just no way to duplicate that.
No.
So at the very least, I think what I'm going to do is the Kontakt version the raw sounds will all be there, but you're going to be missing the experience of the touch screen controls that you have with Mainstage. Excuse me. So it'll be cheaper, because the raw sounds will be there and it'll sound great, and it'll sound pretty much exactly the same as the native Mainstage version. But there's some things I'm going to do to try and get it as close as I can. Like one of them is I've taken custom reverb impulses of the AMS reverb, and that's a big component of those sounds. And thankfully those impulses work in Kontakt as well as Logic. And I've already tested it, so they sound identical, which is great. But it's just it's a matter of what trade-offs you can make to get it in that format. The main thing is just time. It just takes a lot of time. So
yeah, look, it's obviously it's not without complexity, Jim, and I'm really curious about when you got started. You said you did a bit of quick market research via Facebook and sequestered a whole heap of time, months to get up to speed. Was the learning curve hard just to get into this to a point where you could be confident you'd be able to produce quality?
No, it wasn't hard. Just learning Mainstage and how the layout works. But really, that was I tested it enough on my own before I ever got serious about it to figure out if I could do it. And once I figured that out, the rest was just what I did is I actually bought some of the commercial templates that are out there that from these 2 or 3 companies they do it really well. And I kind of just reverse engineered them. To get some ideas. I didn't want to do what they were doing. In fact, I wanted to go in a completely different direction, but just to learn how Mainstage works, I had to buy something, that was complex and go into layout mode and figure out, well, what are they doing and how does all this work? Because Mainstage is not very intuitive at first. So I did have to learn that, but it didn't take long. I mean, it really, over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, probably just figuring out how to get everything graphically the way I wanted, because I'm pushing it, I think. In fact, Apple reached out and asked if they could, have some copies for their test stand for developing Mainstage, and they actually bought a copy, which was nice. But they told me that I was doing things with it that they never intended, working with imported graphics and stuff like that, and really trying to build something that looked pro, and looked really good and like a commercial product. And so thankfully, it worked, and the thing is, I'm big on testing it. It's basically my personal rig that I've adapted for other people. So I wanted to make sure, first and foremost for me, is this going to work in a mission critical situation? Is it going to work on tour for me? Because we're doing some big shows sometimes, and it needed to be solid. And one of the biggest selling points, I think, is that number one, there's no third-party plugins involved, so you don't have to worry about any authorization. There's no iLock. It's easy. And you're never going to have to worry about, I used this Roland Cloud plugin today. And today it's decided it needs to log in and authorize itself. That's never going to be an issue. Yep. Another thing that's big with it is efficiency. A lot of these sounds, there's 8 layers or more, but the Logic sampler is so efficient that number one, it loads instantly. It streams from disk really, really well. And I have yet in 4 or 5 years of using Mainstage, I've never once had a CPU issue. Most of the time, and my show computer at this point is a 2014. So it's 7 years old. And it still runs flawlessly. The CPU will get up maybe around 30% on some of the bigger patches, but that's it. So it's, people always ask, is it stable? Can you use it in a live situation? And I'm like, man, it runs great as long as you're keeping your expectations in check. I would never use like 8 instances of Omnisphere on a live machine. Just that's asking for trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do it, but then they wonder why they have dropouts or CPU spikes. You just have to keep your expectations in line. But if you're just using stock Logic or Mainstage plugins, it's absolutely brilliant. So
right.
Yeah.
That's excellent. And without getting into numbers, but just more your market, Jim, are you finding you're getting a lot of buyers of these from older musicians like those on this call, who are wanting to recreate some great sounds from the 80s versus, maybe new people or younger people looking to use older sounds to do new things?
I think it's probably the former and not the latter. And I'll say, I mean, it's still a very side thing for me. This has not exploded by any means. However, I am wrestling with the dilemma of it taking so much of my time. Like last year, it was ironic. I've got this killer studio that I love, and I'm surrounded by gear, but I wasn't able to do hardly any music of my own last year because I've spent all my time on developing Backstage Pass. So I've been trying to figure out how can I get this into bigger hands that can help me get it in front of more people, because until you figure out how to crack the code and go viral, which I haven't done, I don't know how to do that. It's in the small hundreds. I mean, it's my user base is maybe 400 people or so, in terms of people that are aware of it, as far as I know. But I'm trying to figure out the next step to get it to go bigger. But in order to do that, I've got to have help. And so I'm working on that. There's some things in motion I can't talk about yet. But all that to say, I do get a lot of people our age, I think, that they see the video for DX Dreams, the one that's all the 80 songs cut together. And that blows people's minds, because when I tell them that was all done with these sounds, a lot of them right away, they just click by because they're like, man, I want these sounds, if for no other reason than the nostalgia factor and being able to play the songs as you heard them on the radio. And certainly I think a lot of cover bands and wedding bands and stuff like that, it's big for them. As I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know, there's a lot of younger guys though that love it too, because they, gosh, the vintage synth market is huge. And some of these younger guys, God bless them, they'll go out and spend, they think they have to have a real Juno 106. And I'm like, no, you don't. The plugins, I hate to say it, and it's going to split people, but I mean, I've had all that stuff. And some of the better plugin companies now, they've absolutely nailed it. I mean, Softtube, their Juno 106 and their Mini Moog, and the Roland Cloud stuff, it is absolutely spot on. The trouble is a lot of that stuff is what I was saying earlier. It uses a lot of CPU and some of that kind of thing. But these younger guys, they're all obsessed with vintage synths right now. And so the problem is it's extremely expensive. I saw yesterday, somebody listed a Yamaha DX7 for $100,000 on Reverb. And I'm like, guys, yes, there was only 140 of them made, but at the end of the day, it's really just 2 DX7s in a box. It's not worth $100,000. And, but anyway, I've been able to have a lot of this stuff, and I've sampled a lot of it to death in extreme detail. So I think what makes this work is I can give guys access to sounds that they wouldn't have otherwise, like, all the stacks of DX7s and all that kind of thing. So it's a nice alternative.
Oh, that's great. And
viewers, listeners, please check out the video that Jim has referenced, the DX Dreams video. It is cool, really cool.
Yes, we'll be linking to that for sure.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah. If you love 80s, you will be blown away by it. It's so nice.
And speaking of the 80s, I mean, I noticed Cyndi Lauper this morning tweeted on the fact that Girls Just Want to Have Fun blew over 1 billion views on YouTube in the last few days.
And it just shows you the level of
1 billion. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a girl, partner with from time to time on doing cover songs for licensing. And we did Time After Time last year. And it was a blast. So we kind of did like just an in-studio, more of an acoustic version, and but with some orchestral stuff. It was fun. Great song.
Yeah. No, there's still so much interest out there, both from younger and older people. And so probably the last question, Jim, about Backstage Pass is, and you've already alluded to the fact of how much work it is, and also you may have some plans that you can't talk about, but, just broadly, what is next for this, keeping it a sideline and further expansions to it, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that I can tell you, sure. I've got at least 4 more products in the pipeline that are definite. I'm not 100% on the names yet. One of them's tentatively called Prophetic Dreams, which is based on the Prophet 5. I'm taking a different approach with that one where, the Prophet 5 is also mono. It's, it was very primitive like the DX7. So what I'm doing with that one is I'm double tracking it. Every sound I take, I'm doing 2 passes, panning them apart, and I'm twisting that vintage knob a little bit so that it's like basically a stereo Prophet 5 or a Prophet 10. It just sounds massive, and these big pads and organic sounds. So there's going to be an expansion that's based just on that. But it's probably going to include other Prophet models. Like I've got a Prophet Rev 2, which has a really unique sound. And then the Pro, I don't know if you can see it, the Pro 3 behind me, which came out last year. That thing is a monster. So all things Prophet, that's going to be another one. There's one called JX Dreams, which is based on all the Roland analog stuff. So those are the 3 big main, 3 of the 4. Oberheim would probably be the 4th. All those big flavors of the 80s, but certainly kind of what I did with DX Dreams, all the big radio sounds that we remember, but also new sounds that nobody's heard. I'm big on pads and textures and animated stuff. So whatever that one's called, something to do with Roland. Let's see what else. Let's see, Prophetic Dreams, JX Dreams. Drum machine. All the iconic drum machine sounds of the 80s. Same thing. So when I'm done with all this, you'll basically have all the tools to recreate any sound from the 80s. Yeah. And then a 4th aspect is a library of impulse samples from the RMS reverb. Somehow I stumbled on a way to capture that box to a degree where you can't tell which is which. And that's really hard to do. But I think because that reverb did not have modulation in the tail like a lexicon does, it's an easier one to capture. And so that one is all just reverb samples that you can plug it into Logic's Space Designer or any impulse response reverb like Waves or Kontakt. So those are at least the next 4. I'm not sure which order they're going to come out, but
pretty damn impressive for a sideline.
Yeah. Oh, and the VFX, that one just came out a couple weeks ago. The best of VFX. There's going to be more from that one because that was a smaller one. There was only 20 core sounds in that one. But there's a lot more material to come from that one. That's a really unique sounding synth. And so, yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you for talking through that. And I know a lot of people that do use your products, and I haven't pulled the trigger myself yet, but I feel like today might be the day after this chat.
You will, David. I know you. You'll buy it for sure.
I will.
Yeah.
So no, really appreciate.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking the time. And I think what people appreciate with Backstage Pass too is that, when they are seeking support or whatever, they are dealing with you directly. And I understand that has its challenges, to say the least, but it really is a great approach.
Very cool.
Yeah, what I can tell you about that, in terms of what I can't really talk about yet, I am in the process of it. I've been looking for a partnership for a while, like a bigger company that can take over those aspects that are too much for me. And once they do, I have landed on a company, and I think it's going to be a great partnership. They're going to take over support, which is a huge load off, because so much of the time I get the proverbial, hey, I just bought my first Mac. Now what do I do? And I'm like, those are I can't do that. I don't have the time to handhold. But you know what? I think one of the things that has helped it to grow to even where it is now is I've always taken the time. I've FaceTime with people. I'll call them. And I think that blows people away. Like, oh, wow, this guy really cares. And that's a big deal. But there's a point at which you just can't do that for everybody. It eats you alive. And I would never get anything else done.
Yeah.
No,
so
it's not a good use of your time.
Well, and you know what, I still will do it as often as I can, because I think it's important. I think Spectrasonics grew to where they are because Eric Persing he's a big-hearted guy, and he to this day, he's still, from time to time you see him on forums and stuff, and he's had a great attitude, and I think that's a big reason for why Spectrasonics has grown. And you know, while I don't want this to be my main reason for being on Earth, it would be foolish to not give it everything I've got, you know, and I believe in it. I think there's obviously a market for it. I just don't have what it takes to get it out to the wider world. And so that's what I think this company is going to be able to help me do, and ultimately do a better job at creating great content in the first place. And because right now I'm averaging one release a year, and I gotta ramp that up. You know, it's and I think that's it's going to help me do that.
You mentioned attitude, Jim, and I think you've got it in spades as well. I think you're going to have great success with that. So yeah, really appreciate you talking with us about this as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes,
well,
thank you so much.
Again, enjoyed that a lot, Paul.
Yeah, that was great. Jim is obviously a really generous guy with his time and his thoughts, and it's exciting to see what he's working on. And you know, you get the feeling if you play in an 80s cover band or something similar, and you're comfortable using Mainstage, or even if you're prepared to learn it, seems like a really good option to me.
It is. And look, I mean, I've used Mainstage for a number of years, and even I've always felt a little bit antsy just it being in a covers band about reliability. And I have had the odd issue, but I've actually got one of the new M1 chip MacBooks. And now I think, you know, and particularly with Jim's product that I'm about to buy today, I'm going to take a serious look at going, if not software only, predominantly software, and still maybe having a hardware keyboard as a backup. But it's certainly a solid rig. Yeah.
I think from a reliability point of view, you know, he was pretty overt about saying he's absolutely considered that in the sense of the way he's put it together. And
yeah,
you know, it's a similar concept to what he uses to run those giant shows that he does in his other day job. So I think that would be something that you wouldn't need to worry about too much.
No,
so
exactly. Cool. Yeah, if he's doing it on a 2014 computer,
exactly.
In front of 100,000 people, I'm sure I can cope in front of 80 people. Yeah, that's
right.
You
get that many to your gigs. Oh, well done.
You're being modest.
You'll have to teach me the secret.
Oh, yeah. You're funny. All right. So, thanks, everyone. Again, thank you to you as our patrons. Really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to having more bonus content for you very soon. See you soon.